It is a pleasure, and it is my first time in the Netherlands. So I am very excited to be here. I'm glad you enjoyed my session in Nashville. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this opportunity. So thank you very much. Okay, so today's session, I'm looking at maybe 5 points or 5 relationships. And that, of course, is the relationship of creativity and language and how we process neurologically, looking at the brain functions with creativity, looking at the relationship between creativity and giftedness, the relationship between being intellectually gifted and creatively gifted, looking at the underpinnings of creativity, which are curiosity and imagination. And so what was very helpful is the work of Csikszentmihalyi when he coined the little c being everyday creativity and big C, which is the big creative endeavors that people take. And so I think that's nice. It makes it more attainable. But of course, we are all creative, aren't we? And so one of the things that also has evolved in creativity is the extension of the definition, that being, we used to think of creativity as novelty, but actually creativity now has been extended to include that which is relevant and practical. A lot of teachers are creative, and they think about using creativity to motivate students. And that's just fine. But I'm going to include an and. So we're going to motivate students, and we're going to use creativity to promote content depth. So there is a reason to use creativity in the classroom to reach creative thinkers. So when we look at some linguists, I'm going to start with the language and creativity. Rodney Jones reminds us that creativity is inherent in language. There's also a linguist called Noam Chomsky, and he talks about language acquisition as a creative process as well. Because when you're a baby or you have a baby and that baby makes utterances, that is producing language and creativity. And so we build meaning as we build vocabulary. So here's creativity is all pervasive in our language. It's not necessarily an exceptional quality. We all have creativity. In a study at the University of Zagreb, they surveyed the teachers and asked teachers about the use of creativity in their schools, and the teachers all said that creativity takes an active role in learning. And then the next statement, they all said creativity is used for motivation. So in fact, they weren't using creativity to learn, they were using it for motivation. So creative intelligence is important. It is not necessarily correlated with academic or cognitive intelligence, but it is functional and situational. So we look at some of the research that came about. If you look at this, at 5 years old, we have 98% of the population that thinks divergently. That's more than one right answer. Creative play. And I'm going to tell you something worse than that. In your brain, there are neurons that wither and die if you don't use creative thinking. Literally, they shed, they're falling away. So when adults say, I'm not creative, in a sense, that is true. That is true because they stop using their creativity. If you're looking at this, you can see, okay, some of it comes back with retirement, but still. So is this something we should be concerned about? I think most of us would agree, yes, we should be concerned. We want to make sure that we encourage creativity and that creativity happens in school. Ronco states in his book, students are more creative outside of school than in a school. And do you think that's a problem? Is that a problem? Do you think they have to leave the school to be creative? So a lot of teachers, and most teachers in their undergraduate work or their university work, are not exposed to, well, how do you do this? How do you actually promote creativity in the classroom? And so we look in gifted education at the relationship between intelligence and being creatively gifted. And what we find is the higher the IQ does not necessarily correlate with being creatively gifted. So in a way, you have to have a level of achievement in an academic area in order to be creative about something. So for example, if you're a gifted mathematician and you're also creative, then you're in a math class where you're looking to be intellectually playful, creative in the field of mathematics. So in a sense, we need students to at least have content information. But it is different in looking at the direct relationship. When we look at actual creativity, there's a couple of pieces that we find in every study. It's consistent, and that is curiosity and imagination. Ken Robinson, who became famous, I guess, on YouTube for his, how schools kill creativity. He's very pleasant to listen to and has a good sense of humor. But this is one of his books, and he talks about inspiring imagination and creativity along with that confidence. And so we see that the social emotional characteristics that can't help but mix in with creativity. Because by being creative, a lot of times it's the student who comes up with the unusual idea. They have to have the self-confidence to express that idea. They have to have enough self-esteem to be able to share their ideas and not feel threatened that they might be laughed at or made fun of. They need a teacher that is accepting of differences and open to creative ideas. And so one of the two things that we see, as I mentioned, that is universal across every study was that creative students are curious and use their imagination. There's an old concept of imagination and the new concept. The old being that imagination was only for dreamers. They were called the daydreamers. And now we know that it's not just daydreamers. Imagination is universal. Everybody uses their imagination in some way. We know that it used to be imagination was internal, and now what we're finding is it's not just the self, it's now imagination that is collaborative. In other words, you get into a group and you're all imagining something, creating, producing, and you're all contributing. So we know that now, and I do think it's influenced by the internet. We can share ideas for a presentation we might want to do at The Hague coming up soon, a couple of years. And so we're imagining what that presentation would look like, and then it morphs one way or the other as we contribute to that conversation. So collaboration has become not only in the classroom, it now is the opportunity to be collaborative globally. We look at imagination as stimulating breakthroughs, but that becomes insurmountable. What we know now, just like with creativity, is imagination occurs in our day-to-day activities. It was useful in the arts. We know it's useful now in all fields, and we know that creativity and imagination resides in some students, but now we know it's in all students. So we do see that creativity, imagination exist, situational, contextual, and we can't just say that this student is creative or that student. It's this student is creative in what way, in what context, in what situation. So there are some easy things to do, like word prompts and know, want to know, and wonder about. A lot of people do the chart. What do you know? what do you want to know, and what did you learn. I like what do you know, what do you want to know, and what do you wonder about, because the wonder sparks the curiosity. Plus, minus, and assume is what are the good things, what are the bad things, but what are the assumptions? You might say, that sounds like critical thinking to me. The reason it is creative thinking is because you're looking for more than one response. You're looking for fluency. So I say to my students, I name it. I say, after you've read, let's say, after you've read this article, what do you think is the positive or the pluses of the ideas presented in the article? What are the minuses or the negative ideas presented in the article? And what are some assumptions? And I want you to use your critical thinking, and I want you to back up your thinking with text evidence, okay? I want you to use your creative thinking to come up with more than one idea in as many, all three categories or one or two categories. So you're going to be using both creative thinking and critical thinking. This goes back to the beginning. Use the language so that they know you're expecting creative thinking, critical thinking, name it. And the other thing that's hot on the creativity pike right now is sketch notes, where students take notes through pictures. So I talked about trigger words or verbs, which was the first idea here. Let me go back. Word prompts. So words like visualize, envision, design, invent, and you can pull those off of a lot of thinking skills people, whether you use Revised Bloom's taxonomy or the DOK model. I mean, there's a lot of different models out there. You can look at the creativity verbs and take an idea and then just substitute the verb. You have to have the accepting classroom environment or nothing's going to go anywhere. So that's a given. And then you have standards and content skills, the non-negotiable learning, that which students have to know because somebody has told them they have to know it. And there's not much wiggle room we can do with that. But how we help them to learn, how we help them to embed their interests, how we help them to make connections and personal meaning, we can do through creativity. So we can substitute verbs, we can use creative strategies, we can use creative problem solving or innovation or products, and therefore, nirvana, they become more motivated and also achieve. I encourage you to think of yourself as creative because you are, and use creativity whenever possible. Don't let those saboteurs get you. And I want to thank you for being a wonderful audience.